Okay, thank you so much for joining us today. Today we have two wonderful speakers. The first is going to be Caitlin McKINSTRY. She works with the Native Village of EYAK. And then Kinsey Brown is going to be following. And which project are you with them?
So I am a social scientist here at the Science Center, but in my role right now, this is my LLC Coastal Praxis, which is consulting and research as well. Yeah.
Yes, and Kinsey will talk more about that when she presents. So I'm going to pass it over to Caitlin.
Thanks. Are we good for recording and people online?
Yes, we are recording, and people online are right there.
Oh, great. Gwen's on there. Excellent. Gwen Hannon is here to correct me when I make a mistake with my oceanography and processes. She's a professor at EYAK and one of our partners for this project. So hi, I'm Caitlin. As Christina said, I work at the Native Village of EYAK, where I'm the marine biologist. And today, Kinsey and I are going to be presenting on a new project that we are very excited about. It's a community project that we want you all to be involved with. But first, we have to do some education to understand the project. So we're going to be talking about marine carbon dioxide removal, or mCDR. You're probably just going to hear me say mCDR from here on out. Before we talk about mCDR, we're going to do an overview. So I am going to have you go back to middle school science class. We're going to talk about the carbon cycle. We're going to talk about the biological pump that happens in the ocean. And then we're going to talk about mCDR and mCDR strategies and technologies. From there, I'm going to pass it over to Kinsey, who's going to go into the people realm of what's going on in this industry and area of research. Who's involved, why, where the funding is coming from, and then the policies and regulations surrounding these types of techniques, what's going on in Alaska and what opportunities are here, and the risks and uncertainties associated with these technologies. Then we'll introduce our project. We have a little survey at the end to see what you guys think, and then we'll hopefully have some time at the end for discussion. But first, we have to talk about the carbon cycle. So, the first part of this, we are talking about basically back before the 1600s, before the Industrial Revolution, what was going on in the atmosphere, in the ocean, terrestrial environment, and a little bit in the sediments. So just to kind of orient ourselves into specifically what we're talking about all types of carbon, but mainly we're focusing on carbon dioxide, and mainly everything that we talk about is going to be carbon in the form of carbon dioxide. So the carbon cycle. One of the main sources for carbon is the atmosphere, and that carbon is trapped as carbon dioxide. So one carbon molecule to oxygen molecules. And there it does all its fun cycle things. It goes in and out of the atmosphere. It goes to sinks. Sometimes there are sources that put more carbon in the atmosphere. So let's talk about the sinks first. So carbon and carbon dioxide are pulled out of the atmosphere by different environments and different organisms, especially on land. Trees, forests, animals, anything that's made of carbon is a sink for carbon. So this is one of the biggest sinks in the world. It's not the biggest. We'll talk about the biggest in a second. But a lot of interactions happen. Photosynthesis is a big driver of the sink of carbon here. So light and oxygen or light and CO2 are taken up by plants. They respire oxygen and make more of themselves. More of themselves is made from carbon. Animals also are made of carbon. Sometimes they die. A lot of times they die. Pretty much always they die. Sometimes that carbon that's stored in them does make it into sediments. Sometimes that carbon is stored permanently in those sediments, depending on where they die. And the ocean is one of the biggest carbon sinks in the world, besides the atmosphere. And then it's above the terrestrial environment with forests. And we are going to talk way more about this in the next slide. So just for this to give you a preview, a lot of different processes happen in the ocean. A lot of the carbon that is taken from the atmosphere sometimes ends up in the deep sediments. As far as sources, the ocean is also a big source of carbon dioxide and carbon in general. Lots of things in the ocean breathe. They breathe in oxygen, they expel carbon dioxide. Things decay. other fun processes happen that if I was teaching a different class, we would talk about, but not right now. Forests, and especially critters like our deer here and us, anything that breathes, are a source of carbon dioxide. Plants are really interesting because they do take up a lot of CO2, but they have cellular respiration just like we do, where they do actually expel a little bit of carbon dioxide, not nearly as much as we do. And now we're kind of going fast forward in time, hitting industrial agriculture, which is a big source of carbon and carbon dioxide. Same thing with all of the industrial processes that we are familiar with, huge source of carbon and carbon dioxide. I'm just including cars in this, just little cartoons. And then when forests catch on fire, all of that carbon that was trapped in those forests goes back into the atmosphere and back into that cycle. Okay, so zooming in on the ocean. Oh, yep. So more and more carbon dioxide is going into the atmosphere, which is the problem we're trying to solve. So in the ocean, there's a really interesting process that happens every day, all the time, called the biological carbon pump. This is going to be the crux of the mCDR techniques we're going to talk about in just a second. So very similar to what happens on land, where we have our big source of carbon dioxide in the sky. We have our sunlight, which fuels photosynthesis and all those fun plants, algae, mangroves, seagrasses, pull carbon dioxide out of the water to make more of themselves. The same thing happens in the ocean, open ocean, just at a smaller scale. So this is where we have our single cellular plants or algae. They're not technically plants. Anyways, different lecture. Those single cellular phytoplankton, they again take sunlight, carbon dioxide, and they make more of themselves and more and more and more. And that's what kicks off the food web, especially in our region. So phytoplankton start growing in the springtime. They attract a lot of zooplankton. Zooplankton eat the phytoplankton, which in turn they feed fishes, little fishes, and then big fishes, and then big happy whales. And then as time goes on, the same thing that happened with our deer happens in the ocean. Things die, phytoplankton die, phytoplankton are pooped out. All of sorts of particulate matter enters the open ocean and starts sinking, right? And so everything goes down. Fish die, some of them are eaten, and they slowly go down in those little fuzzies, but sometimes their whole bodies sink. Whales die, they sink. If they are in deep enough water, that carbon will be stored for potentially a really long period of time. How long depends on where these processes happen. And there's still a lot of research trying to understand those time scales. So if you're close to the surface of the water, that carbon may not leave the ocean and go back into the atmosphere for maybe a few decades, depending on what the process is. The deeper you go, 100 years. And once you get into the deep, deep parts of the ocean, potentially we're thinking that it can be thousands of years that carbon from the atmosphere is trapped. Okay? So that's the basis of some of the techniques and technologies I'm going to start talking about. So the problem that we have right now globally, there's too much carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. The solution in mCDR are human interventions to pull carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere and store it in the oceans at depth. That topic, that concept is specifically what we're looking at with this project. There are a bunch of different ways to move carbon around, trap it on land, but that's not the area that we're discussing right now. We are just talking about pulling carbon out of the atmosphere, out of the surface of the ocean, and sinking it long-term in the ocean. The proponents of this, researchers, industry, are looking at these methods as potentially $1 trillion industry to rival the oil industry globally. And Alaska has been identified as a good place for these projects. And I'm going to talk specifically why in just a second. So what are these technologies? What are these methods? I like to call the range of these technologies gee-whiz-matrons to just kind of hacking that ocean carbon pump and adding things to the ocean. So for me, the gee-whiz-matrons are things like direct carbon capture methods where engineers and people very much smarter than me create systems on land to suck up water and then put it back into the ocean without carbon. And so let's go through a few of these. I'm not going to talk about deep sea storage or artificial upwelling, downwelling. We just don't have enough time. I'm more than happy to have a conversation with you later. But artificial upwelling, downwelling sounds like it's super expensive and might not actually work very well. And deep sea storage may not be happening in the Gulf of Alaska right now, so I'm just going to skip it. So we're going to go over a little bit of direct carbon capture, ocean alkalinity enhancement, ocean iron fertilization, macroalgae cultivation, and then blue carbon. So the first one are direct carbon capture methods. So these are the GWSMatrons. There is a project going on that Kinsey's going to just touch very briefly with a group called Ebb Carbon down in Puget Sound, where they are building a facility that takes up seawater, puts it through various different chemical processes to remove and strip the CO2 from the seawater, put that stripped CO2 somewhere, and then clean it further and put it back out into the ocean. This is a rather complicated slide. It was one of the best ones I could find for summarizing this. I am not an expert on direct carbon capture methods or any of these methods, but I just wanted to give you an idea of kind of how that happens. Where that stripped CO2 and seawater goes, it has to be put somewhere permanently for it to be considered mCDR and for it to be considered removed so that it doesn't interfere or come back in contact with the atmosphere. And a lot of these techniques, as you'll see, which is the whole point of our project, have a lot of questions. There are a lot of unknowns. So just to give us some oceanographic background for the Gulf of Alaska for the next technology, I just want to tell you why Alaska is prime for this one. Alaska is really, the Gulf of Alaska is a very unique place in the world. It's what's called a high nutrient or a high nitrate, low chlorophyll zone. So we have a heck of a lot of nutrients. And down here, this map, this red blob is showing a lot of nitrate. And there's also a lot of chlorophyll and phytoplankton blooms happening here in the Southern Ocean because there's a lot of nitrate. It's one of those fertilizer inputs that inspires phytoplankton to grow happy and healthy. But in the Gulf of Alaska, we have not nearly as much phytoplankton and productivity as you would expect for the amount of things like nitrate that we have. And that's because we are iron limited. This area in the Southern Ocean is not nearly as iron limited as we are. There are some other places that are. But iron is a micronutrient, which means that not a lot of it will create a really big phytoplankton bloom. Okay. And so back in the 80s and 90s, scientists, oceanographers, because they were just interested in how the ocean works, started really investigating this and started doing iron fertilization experiments. And you can see that this little blip right here. So this is the Gulf of Alaska. All of this color is just where the phytoplankton is blooming. So the darker red color that you're seeing means that there's more phytoplankton, there's more biomass that's growing in the ocean. And so what some scientists did back in 2002, they put a bunch of iron in the ocean and wanted to see if they could make a phytoplankton bloom that you could see from space. And they did. And it was really interesting. There was some really cool conclusions that came from that, and it really helped us understand how our ocean processes work. They weren't interested in sinking carbon at that point. So those studies were not looking at mCDR. But now with mCDR strategies, ocean iron fertilization is one of the technologies that is back on the plate. So adding a bunch of iron from a boat into the water, creating a big phytoplankton bloom, and really kickstarting that biological pump to drag a lot of carbon down into the deep, deep ocean. And again, remember, this doesn't work near shore. You have to be out pretty far. How far and how deep, we're still kind of trying to figure that out. Okay. The next one is, it's similar in that from a boat, things are being put into the water. So these are ocean alkalinity enhancements. But the material that's being put into the water are things like quicklime, olivine, and other minerals from land going into the water to directly have a chemical reaction with the water and the atmosphere. And then those minerals will sink into the depths and take the carbon with them. So it's kind of, people talk about adding like an Alka-Seltzer to the ocean. That's kind of what this is. So this isn't necessarily doing anything biological. It's not creating a phytoplankton bloom. It's having those minerals and materials directly capture carbon dioxide and have them sink. Okay. Macroalgal cultivation is another one. So seaweed farming. In my day job, one of my other projects, I run the kelp farm for the native village of EYAK, where we do research into how to grow kelp and all sorts of fun things. I do have funding to take kelp out of the water, put it at a farm and see what happens to the soils when you add kelp to agricultural soils. But this one is specifically talking about growing huge amounts of biomass of kelp and then just taking it to the deep ocean and sinking it. So every single blade of kelp is made of carbon, sinks into the deep ocean where in theory it's trapped. Right? Blue carbon is another one that is related to mCDR, and I'm lumping it in here because it's an important one to know. These projects are already happening all over the country, but it's basically habitat restoration along our coast. So in places where mangrove forests have been decimated and removed, replanting mangrove forests, making sure that salt marsh habitat is revitalized, things like that. Okay, so to give you a sense of scale and what it should take to limit warming by 1.5 degrees, we have to get to net zero according to the IPCC. The very first thing that we have to do isn't mCDR, it's reduce emissions. After that, we collectively as an entire planet have to remove between 7 to 8 gigatons of carbon every year per year from now until 2050, just to make it dense. That number, it does not make sense in my head. What the heck is a gigaton? A gigaton is 1 billion metric tons. And for reference, a humpback whale is 40 tons. So technically, we're trying to remove 175 to 250 million humpback whales worth of carbon every single year. So this is a scale issue, and this is why we want to talk to you guys about it. Because if the industry does ramp up, they're going to be doing this all over the world. So I'm done with my part, and I'm going to switch over to Kinsey.
I don't have as many whale references, unfortunately.
Yeah.
Okay.
Just make me feel the feelings.
Oh, good. Okay, so let's take a little break from the science. Thank you so much, Caitlin, for that wonderful foundation. And we'll talk about kind of who's involved and why in this space, both funding and interest wise. I don't know if I can move that at all. Okay. Okay, so basically who is involved in this work can be broken up into 3 different sectors. You've got private companies and impact investors, the public sector, and then the philanthropic sector. So private companies, right now, the largest pre-purchasing effort of carbon credits is called Carbon Frontier Solutions. And it is put together by companies like Microsoft and Meta and Shopify. And they are trying to pre-purchase $1 billion worth of carbon credits through mCDR projects. So that kind of gives you an idea of where this potential $1 trillion will come from. is these impact investors. In the public sphere, most of this funding is going to research and development through departments like NOAA or Department of Energy. Universities are leading that charge. And then in philanthropy, this is a really diverse group of funders and people that are interested. These might be groups that are either NGOs that are looking to guide how this is put into the ocean or how it would affect communities, or third parties that want to enhance mCDR techniques around the world, and they're helping out with policy foundations, things like that. So we'll kind of dive into these a little bit. None of these are siloed. This is sort of an interdependent ecosystem. Each contacts the other, each funds the other. And because mCDR is really in the research phase, so much of this is still just focused on funding, research, and pilot projects. So let's focus on the companies first. These are a few of the efforts that are currently happening. These are pilot projects, current projects. Some of the techniques that Caitlin mentioned are here. So the macroalgae or kelp sinking, running tide, carboniferous. Has anyone ever seen these logos or heard of these efforts before? Okay, running tide. Carbon run is an interesting one with mineral alkalinity enhancement. That's actually in rivers. Planetary is located up in Nova Scotia, and they actually partner with the McKINSTry tribe up there. So this is definitely happening, and it's a very active space. So mCDR companies that are selling carbon credits for marine carbon dioxide removal are called mCDR or carbon suppliers. They are supplying carbon offset credits to companies that are buying them to meet their emission reduction goals. So other companies that are overproducing emissions are going to buy these carbon credits from these companies, and this is kind of how this is funded. So this is all based on the foundation of the idea of the carbon credit market. A carbon credit is a tradable permit that is the right to emit 1 metric ton of carbon dioxide. So how many whales?
0.140th.
0.140th of a whale. So not very much, but the carbon credit is worth something. So these are used by companies and governments to offset what they are already producing. So for example, a factory in California, if it is not meeting its emissions requirements that were set by either itself, its board of directors, or say the air district in the state of California, it can buy carbon credits from a macroalgae sinking facility in Alaska to offset that carbon. We've also got sort of the philanthropic sector, which is with nonprofit coordinators, we're going to call them, and non-governmental organizations. These groups of organizations are kind of like the support orgs for this whole ecosystem. So you're going to see logos that you definitely recognize on the left there with these NGOs, places like Ocean Conservancy and EDF. They're really advocating for environmentally or socially responsible mCDR. They're trying to kind of get out ahead of it and create frameworks for how do we be inclusive? How do we be just? Is this good for the environment? And how do we make sure that this can be reported and measured in a way that is real? You've also got what we're kind of calling coordinators or other nonprofits like support organizations, Carbon to Sea Initiative. You've probably heard of Ocean Visions. Few of Caitlin's slides had them on there, as well as Carbon 180. And these folks provide funding or re-granting, sort of coordination, grant writing experience to people like us that want to learn more about mCDR or possibly create these frameworks that the NGOs are helping us do. So as you can see, these are also kind of in conversation with each other. And this is more on the social environmental side of things. Okay, so policy and regulation. Who can do what and where? It really depends on where we are talking about. So like Caitlin mentioned, some of these projects are going to be on shore and some of them are going to be way out in the deep sea. So that regulation, you know, that's going to go from state, local to federal to an international scale. It's important to note that there really is no explicit one overarching law federally, domestically in the United States, or internationally that specifically talks about marine carbon dioxide removal. However, At all of these levels, there are other laws and regulations that are related to the marine environment in general that would probably and will definitely affect marine carbon dioxide removal, such as dumping of things in the sea or putting infrastructure into the water. So on the state level, for example, in Alaska, we have laws regarding who can plant seaweed where and what for, how that's done. Alaska actually has a very streamlined macroalgae process compared to other states. So we're pretty set up there. Do we have legislation that talks about marine carbon dioxide removal explicitly? No, not yet. Within the last 5 years, there has been a lot of work within the Department of Natural Resources on land-based carbon sinks. And you can go onto DNR's website and find that. It's pretty interesting. That's mostly with forests and saline sediments. So kind of like those intertidal coal seams. And that's pretty new. They've just developed some frameworks around how to evaluate projects and process them. So one could imagine that that might be able to be used for marine carbon dioxide removal as well in Alaska. Federally, once again, nothing explicit. Although, of course, we've got stuff like the Marine Protection Act and the Clean Water Act. So that is going to definitely limit any sort of activity that one does in the ocean, whether it be towards navigation or ecosystem, rivers, NEPA. I mean, there's just name your algorithm of numbers there with letters. What are those called? Acronyms. Thank you. Jeez. And you've got it. Internationally, you've got even less. So the London Protocol. The London Protocol really talks about the dumping of disposal waste in international waters. Is something like alkalinity enhancement considered disposable waste? Once again, it's not talked about. These are things that people need to discuss and we need to explore. Recently, just this last fall, the Treaty of the High Seas was adopted by 73 countries. The United States was not one of them that ratified that, but that required a ecosystem impact assessment for anything that would happen in international waters. So this was specifically targeting kind of like deep sea mining. Once again, this could also be applied to marine carbon dioxide removal. So all this being said, with such ambiguous policy and no explicit terms at the state or federal level, what's really going to be important is that us as communities make our voices heard throughout this process. And sound policy really does begin with informed communities. If we're not informed, we can't inform the policy process. What are the opportunities here? They are many. We could be scientific leaders in the understanding of cold water systems. Alaska seems to be a place of great interest in the mCDR global community. It could create local jobs and workforce development in marine monitoring and engineering. That would certainly employ a lot of people in the entire region. We could, of course, have partnerships between tribes and researchers and funding for those partnerships towards beneficial projects for all of us. We would influence ethical and place-based climate-based solutions that might also have positive ecosystem benefits to our fisheries. On the other side, there's definitely a lot of uncertainties and some risk. We don't know at scale what effect these things have ecologically. There could be unintended changes to our food webs, including our subsistence and commercial resources. Economically, there might be conflicts with our fishing industry, using the ocean space in general, or even tourism. It could be an eyesore. Socially, there's definitely the possibility that with lack of good policy, there might not be a clear way for communities to consent for companies to come in and do this, especially if it's outside of those state waters. Who enforces bad behavior when something goes wrong? There's a technical risk as well. Lots of these, like Caitlin mentioned, are unproven and we're not sure if they work. If they do work, they are needed at a huge scale. And so the risk in investing in that scale is pretty big, even though the benefits could also be big. So these are all questions that we need to ask together. Communities like Cordova can help shape how this research is done responsibly. That's what we're doing here right now. We hope that you guys continue to join us for this dialogue series. Responsible research really does have some concrete tenets to it. I pulled this from the Ocean Conservancy's report on what responsible mCDR research and development would look like in coastal communities. Of course, transparency, okay, clear goals and sharing with data, inclusivity of who is involved and who's making decisions at the table. This is the First Nations president down in the Quinault Nation, I believe, and she is also the vice president of the International Tribal Consortium on Carbon Capture. And she is leading the charge on getting voices at the table where they need to be. Accountability, right? Who enforces the bad behavior and how do we monitor that? And then, of course, precaution, moving slowly and starting small. So, as we keep saying, we're in the very early stages of this conversation. We can continue to shape it. Cordova is a part of what will be some early frameworks of how we think about this. And that's what our project is. So this is the CLAM project. This is what Caitlin and I are doing with our partners in Kodiak. We are funded by one of those coordinators that you saw earlier, Carbon 180. And I think one of our collaborators is actually on the call-in. So shout out Eric if you are. So CLAM stands for Community Leaders and mCDR. So what we're going to do is, starting right now with this talk, we're bringing together our coastal communities to talk about mCDR, what is it, and then discuss what it could mean for Alaska. So our partners in Kodiak are going to be doing the same thing, getting some workshops together to sort of build understanding, gather some input. We could potentially have a framework at City Council to say, like, before a project even gets here, we know exactly what we want from it and how we track it. That's just an example of something that we could put together. So if you guys are interested in this, please stay abreast with us. There's a few ways to stay updated. So overall, this information is hosted on the Alaska Ocean Acidification Network website. You can always reach out to Caitlin or myself. You know where to find us, if not in our offices. I think everyone knows where we live. If you guys wouldn't mind taking a quick Mentimeter survey, we are going to host a workshop in December, and this will be a pretty directed workshop. It'll be longer, and we really want to start working through some of these longer questions. Is this working for anyone?
Oh, you took the QR code.
Oh, I took the QR code away. Got too excited. Okay, QR code, capture.
So,
Yeah, I know. This is a tech forward presentation.
See if Lynn wants to say anything to you after we're done.
Oh, yeah. I think this is how it works.
yeah, what more? How did it feel?
Oh, it says view results.
The like sunshine.
View results, it's fine.
Oh,
Why not?
Darn.
thank you for being our guinea pig.
This usually works so well.
Hey, Kinsey, I signed up. It says enter code to join.
Okay, I know the code.
We need that code back up there too.
Is that the code? You guys, this is just some of the risks and possibilities that could exist. Let's see.
It doesn't like my internet.
I think we have some of our collaborators online. Gwen, do you want to say anything while we're figuring out this survey?
Sure. I was also trying to figure out the survey on my own phone. Thanks for doing that first presentation. This is a new project that we're all on together, and this is our first go at presenting it to folks. I would say that I have one small correction on the oceanography, which is about the iron fertilization part. I would say Alaska is not the only place where there are iron limited waters, but it is the place where there are iron limited waters that's sort of the closest to major shipping routes. So it's like the most convenient place that there are iron limited waters. And the Southern Ocean also has iron limited waters, but it's just very far from a lot of ports. So small correction there.
Thanks, Gwen. And the code is 5168 1310.
Wait.
Christina is writing it down. Thank you so much. And thanks, Gwen, for joining. Oh,
Just tell me.
It's asking for, if you go back, I'm gonna try.
What do we think?
Aha. No, you're not.
I wasn't sure. I only took email.
Gotcha.
That's it.
We'll get this.
oh, wait. I see what's happening. Okay, try it.
Yeah, that's. Oh, okay.
Okay, got it.
What do you want to know about marine carbon?
Ah, okay.
Got it.
Yay.
You want to know. Then our answers should start popping up there.
They're popping up online. Yeah. I think it's like,
Oh, it's
this one is, this is my master. Apparently, that's why it wasn't working. Yeah.
Kinsey, is this QR code somewhere else for people who don't have their phones with them?
I can get it to you somehow. Yeah.
And the code.
And we do have some flyers printed out in the back if you guys just kind of want a quick and dirty summary of what we talked about and how to kind of like find the next steps. The workshop that we are putting together on this is going to be December 4th. So if you're interested, please, we want you there. Plug it in your calendar. And some of the questions that you guys are inputting right now will be a part of that workshop.
What was the name of that?
December 4th.
And since we have your email, can you send an email? While you're entering stuff, does anybody have any immediate questions for us right now? We also have Gwen online to handle some oceanography questions. We have Rob Campbell in the room to answer PWS specific questions. If you have any feelings, you can share your feelings.
I got one.
Yeah,
Just the title itself. It's kind of a little bit misleading as far as, are we removing carbon from the water or are we adding carbon to the water?
We are removing carbon from the carbon cycle. We are removing it from the atmosphere and storing it. That's what.
Just the title, it seems like carbon from the water, but we're actually pulling it from the atmosphere and putting it in the water.
Well, technically it could go into the sediments, but yeah, Gwen, what do you think?
I think that's true. A lot of it would be expected to be dissolved into the water in the deep sea. So that's a fair point. It's not our term. This is the term that the industry is using. And I think it's to reflect that the other stuff is also called carbon dioxide removal, and they're just saying this is the marine version. But you're right, it's going into the water largely and being taken out of the atmosphere.
I feel like it's safe. I mean, if you put dumping in there, then that's gonna set up red flags for people, but that's really what it is. If you call it what it is, we're dumping carbon into the ocean. So
Or locking.
I say dumping's the scary word.
Yeah.
I don't know, is Rob here?
Was.
Stepped out.
Oh, he stepped up. Because I thought, and maybe you can just shed some light. I thought that he was doing some nickel or iron profiling out in front of the Delta many years
Yeah.
ago, I thought. What was that about?
Yeah,
Is that a contributing factor to this picture about?
It's a contributing factor to why the Gulf of Alaska is a really interesting place to be doing this. So, Rob and his colleagues at, I think John Cruces was at USGS at the time, or he still is. There wasn't a lot of information about all of the dust coming from the Delta, and where that goes into the water and what it's doing. And it's very rich, high in iron. So he set up some really cool particle collectors on Middleton Island. And he worked with some folks upriver doing some other carbon forest restoration work as well to document that the dust coming from the Copper River Delta and going into our region of the northern Gulf of Alaska is what's really driving productivity in the region. And that's one of the reasons why this area is super productive versus the farther south you go and the less that dust reaches. And I really wish you would see me getting more information. That was just one I was.
So that's, I think that's a cool link for us locally.
Yeah.
To be tuning into what we have contributed and what perspective we do have. You're exactly right. I mean, those winds set up every winter.
Yeah.
And so it's interesting to see that we do have a little bit of a foot in the door in this.
Yeah, there's a project description of that on the Science Center's website, I think,
Right.
if you search ROB or glacial weathering.
I'd like to add that the Northern Gulf of Alaska Long-Term Ecological Research Project, which I'm a part of here at UAF, has been measuring trace metals across the Northern Gulf of Alaska for 5 or 6 years now. And there's some pretty good data characterizing what that the iron limitation is mostly very far offshore, like way off the shelf, usually greater than 150 nautical miles from shore. So much of the where iron limitation would theoretically take place would be quite far, but also the Gulf of Alaska is water moves, right? So it's a downwelling system, and the water that is way offshore does eventually make its way towards shore.
We're talking about copper river dust and iron fertilization, and specifically your project from the early teens.
A lot of dust.
So we're sort of aware of that, Rob, but I think in the context of this, that we were sort of, I guess I was just wanting to point out that we have some local information that was generated, through your efforts and here at the Science Center. And that, yeah, I think it's just, I think at the December meeting, that'll be really a key piece for people to more easily relate to scaling this whole project and scaling this whole conversation down to, yeah, we've got a pump called the winter winds, right, that load up the North Coast every season. So yeah, no, just that was really bad. So I think it's exciting.
I was just wondering if I guess my concern with like iron fertilization would be that you're just like, there'd be like massive eutrophication in the area, and then would you essentially create a dead zone, or am I like missing? Would you need a lot more iron than you're planning on putting in the ocean?
Gwen, would you like to take that one?
Sure. There are some folks who are modeling what you're talking about, trying to understand if there was a lot more carbon fixed at the surface that sank to depth, if that would lower the oxygen concentrations in the ocean. And we know that that's sort of what you're talking about with the dead zone, where when you have dead biomass that sinks into the deep ocean, it gets eaten up by bacteria, and those bacteria are taking down the oxygen. And the modeling study suggests that iron fertilization would decrease the oxygen content of the ocean. And we don't currently have a big problem with this in the North Pacific in our region, but there are other areas where oxygen minimum zones are an issue, and that could be exacerbated by this kind of strategy.
And for those who don't know, Gwen is our PhD oceanographer at UAF that we're collaborating with. Sorry, I don't think we introduced her. Thanks, Gwen.
Sounded like you're still not sure about exactly where some of this could take place, but if you were putting some of the macro algae into the ocean to sink, Would you guess, would it have to be like off the outer continental shelf?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of that research is just starting. Most of these techniques and technologies are still just in the modeling phase. And we don't know what happens when you put a pile of kelp into the deep ocean and what is deep enough. Those are still questions that are trying to be answered. So having a voice in making sure those questions are answered responsibly is kind of one of the goals of this project, and making sure that you get to ask that question.
Yeah, it's a long, expensive
Yeah.
distance to go and very limited in its availability to go there.
Yeah, and the whole carbon budget of taking a ship out there, growing the kelp, taking a ship out there, and thinking it has to be factored in.
That's one thing that I don't know how deep is, but I think as far as like access to really deep water, that is the Princeton Sound has, you've got like 4 fathom water.
Yeah, I mean, especially for the iron fertilization experiments that Gwen's talking about, that would be hundreds of miles offshore. Kind of like where I was showing you in that original map that's buried in there. I can pull it up for you later, Steve, but
Thousands of fathoms.
Yeah, I'm like, I think in meters, so I'm trying to convert in my mind. Thousands of fathoms certainly would be the ideal.
1,000 meters.
more than that.
Yeah, so the shelf is about 200 to 300 meters deep, and most of these things would be better done off of the continental shelf to get them into truly deep water, to have that more like hundreds to thousands of years residence time in the deep water.
So on the nitrate map, we saw most of it was like in the northern part of the world, in the very southern. Is the carbon sequestration mostly in very cold waters? It's more effective, or is this also happening in tropical areas? Or
It's more effective in cold water just because of where phytoplankton blooms happen. They don't happen in the same extreme as they do in the equator because of the way the ocean is. There's a lot of fun oceanographic factors that go into that I would be more than happy to talk about, and Gwen and Rob would too. It's just near the poles in temperate water is when you see those seasonal cycles of springtime phytoplankton blooms and productivity, and then things kind of petering out in the summertime. Those factors don't happen at the equator because the water is so much warmer, and the ocean chemistry is very different.
so are most projects looking to do it in the extreme colder temperature water?
For the ocean iron fertilization studies, I believe so. I don't think there's any tropical or subtropical projects in Australia.
I'm aware of one person in our department who has, there's a little bit of water around the equatorial Pacific. So that's like off of Ecuador there, off of South America. Sorry, I'm pointing, and of course you can't see. There is some iron limited water there, but it's not as much as in the North Pacific or in the Southern Ocean. And then I would say that some of these other techniques that are like ocean alkalinity enhancement, it doesn't actually matter because they're not trying to use phytoplankton. So those could theoretically happen in any region, any waters.
Is there any known way to measure the carbon that has been sunk into the deep?
Are no standards. And like I said, a lot of it's modeling right now. But Gwen, I know, has probably a lot of experience measuring carbon in the ocean and how she does it.
Sure, I work with people who do these measurements. You can measure the carbon chemistry of the water as one way of doing this. You can also use sort of like a rain gauge type trap that collects sinking material from the surface ocean, that you can estimate how much dead and dying material has sunk from, you know, a phytoplankton bloom, for example. So there are methods to do this, but oceanographers, we can't really cover that much of the ocean. In my program, we do this, like we have 3 cruises a year, 2 or 3 cruises a year, and we probably get a total of 20 measurements of this kind of rain gauge technique. It's expensive, it's difficult to get out there. So there's a lot of uncertainties in the rate and efficiency of carbon sinking from the surface into the deep.
And to clarify, I mean, there are no standards for like the carbon credits industry for measuring this. In my head, right?
Yeah, on the marine side, yeah, it's still kind of emerging on the carbon credits. And it's new for land-based too. It's only been around since like 2015.
Yeah, just to add to that, I know on the ocean side that trying to figure out like how to measure it and verify it is a really, really tricky thing. The concept of trust came up several times in the presentation, which is a tricky thing. So there's a whole other parallel industry of carbon measuring people springing up. And between the two nascent industries, it does kind of feel like the Wild West right now because there is not a lot of oversight.
Yeah, and we don't know if that carbon credit you bought from that source is actually carbon or just somebody is a decimal point off.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah, some of these groups, their interest in mCDR is completely just in the measuring side of it and verification.
We were talking about biomass, dumping in that large amount when we're talking about, humpback whales and how many, heat generated. I know that's a lot, obviously colder when you're talking about those, but like the heat that would be generated from, the decay process would be slower. But is that is this going to, is there going to be so much that's going to generate heat?
That's a really good question, especially for like the alkalinity enhancement. I don't know, I'm not an expert in that one, but that's something really interesting because you're adding quicklime or all of these the water. So
we're going
if you done that process in the lab and it doesn't get warm.
Yeah, we're going to speed up the ocean warming by this process. Is that something that is being looked at in the testing?
Rob, go ahead.
A really good question.
Yeah, that's a good question. Not that I know of, and I would have to read more to think about that.
One for the community workshop in December.
Yeah.
So I can clearly see how something like this, how you could make money off something like this. And I can clearly see how large companies could sell that as a reason to buy things for that. I could see the advantage for the companies. I could see the advantage for the people doing this. But is there any group that's focused like globally on, does any of that matter without scale? And how do you globally address the issue of scale here? Or are we just finding a way to sell something and feel a little better about it?
Yeah, the scale is really the issue here because I showed you how many humpback whales they want to take out. So the idea is do the research now to scale up. So scaling up is technically the end goal for a lot of, especially the for-profit groups.
Yeah, we're in R&D right now, but I think this is starting to really ramp up in the last few years. Murkowski just co-signed a bill, the Rescue Oceans Act, which puts about $2 billion towards this if it goes through. So people are definitely talking about this more and more.
And a fair bit of this will probably be proprietary, right? As money starts getting made.
Yeah, and one thing that, we've talked about in our discussions is those groups making a lot of money and doing it in our backyard, and where's the benefit for us? And that's one thing that we hope maybe people have ideas about or want to explore during the workshop. I have some ideas, but we are, Kinsey, myself, Gwen, everybody in our group, we are staying neutral. We're not for it. We're not against it. We want to hear you guys. We want your voices elevated as peers. So we're not here to say, oh, this is really scary or, oh, this is really great. We want you guys to make up your minds, collectively come together, say what you want to see. policy wise, or how we make our voices heard and what we want to say, basically. I was saying that we're trying to get a seat at the table before the table even sets. We're trying to be proactive about this instead of reactive, because we all know the story of being reactive to bad things happening in our oceans and our backyards. So we're just trying to get ahead of everything. So sorry if I don't have concrete answers for a lot of these things. The science stuff, there might be some, I just don't know them. But you guys are asking a lot of really good, important questions.
Yeah, we're obviously not
Person in the
experts.
state to do it.
We're just community advocates, and it's cool that Cordova gets to be one of the leading communities in this. Yeah, Clay.
I'll just think out loud for a sec, but like kelp and seaweed, for example, if you could use it for terrestrial farm supplement that can increase growth rates off ground, then you have a carbon offset there from your carbon uptake.
Yes.
And maybe, especially with measurement obscurity, it's easier to measure like a crop yield and have a marketable product into an industry that maybe sell
And
carbon credits.
yeah, or using kelp as protein, kelp as a bioplastic. Those ideas are awesome, and you and I both know how awesome they are. A lot of those don't fall under the term mCDR because you're not storing carbon in the ocean. Yeah. So those are wonderful things that.
Just my own personal recommendation is to do a different comparison than sending whales to the bottom of I prefer,
Look, yeah.
as much as I'm sick of hearing, so many Olympic-sized swimming pools
Yeah.
or so many Big Macs or whatever, but it kind of slipped a little bit there, it's just, we're gonna get rid of some whales. No. It's worth more whales the better.
I had the train car up. Gwen and I were in a presentation where one of the researchers said that 1 billion gigatons of carbon is the equivalent to a train full of coal wrapping around the entire Earth 4 times. And that's just 1 billion. And we have
Yeah, back to your comment about scale, Matt. It's
Place to anchor in Prince William Sound is so covered with kelp farms.
Yeah.
And will kelp grow everywhere?
I mean, along the scale lines, I mean, has anyone looked into all right, is kelp a realistic way for this, and how many acres of Alaska's water would need to be covered to even have a measurable impact?
Yeah, it would have to basically go from something like Argentina all the way up here to Alaska in a 200-mile wide strip. So it's, and that's why we're talking about so many different techniques, because not just one of these things is going to be implemented. Not just one of these things is going to be the saving grace. It's all of them in different places where they need to be fit for scale, and then also with the terrestrial component. So a statistic like that is saying that you're only using seaweed. But I really haven't seen any good statistics like that. Like, oh, if we use this, all of these things, like how much to scale would all of these things have to happen and interwork together. But that information might be out there. I just don't know.
Yeah, in 2023, NOAA put out a pretty good report that just basically put all the different methods on a matrix of cost, effectiveness, scale, and there's a balloon of how much carbon it would, and then how expensive it would be, are the arrows on either side, and there's just huge margins of unknown, but I can email that to you if you're interested, because it is very interesting. Probably have time for one more question. Yeah. Or not, we'll see you in December. Thanks for coming.